talking actuarially, your fight with them. Now talk about when you would go out with brokers to employers and you're talking about this new concept. What did it look like and how are they reacting to this?
I found that employers who have a business mindset understood the concept of continual economic involvement faster than many of the insurance professionals, unfortunately. A typical response by a broker, especially the competitive broker who heard it the first time, is, wait a second, you're offering a $500 monthly deductible? That's $6,000 a year. I was always fascinated about their abilities with math. It was amazing. 500 times 12 is 6,000. Yes, but life doesn't happen that way. It very seldom happens where people will incur the deductible 12 times in a year. As a matter of fact, people are smarter than we give credit for because it's a family monthly deductible, by the way, which means that's the family's budget, whether you're a person of...
Meaning if you and I, father and son, go into the hospital that month, capped at $500 the family. Total.
500. If a woman goes in to have a baby, it's $500. If the baby is born and it has an issue, maybe it's got fluid in its lungs, and or it's jaundice, and it has to stay in the hospital, another deductible for the baby. Not with a family. It's a budgeting tool, all right? And let's go back to the 12 times a year. If you need monthly visits, why not do it on the first day of the month and the last day of the month and skip a month? And you've just cut your deductible exposure in half. Why not give people the opportunity to think for themselves? Because I have found that when you think for yourself, there's a better end result. I will make a statement that I can stand by. We've done business over the past 40 years with at least 20 stop-loss facilities. And I believe I'm accurate in saying that as a TPA, we have had the best overall loss ratio with most of our stop-loss carriers, if not all of them, than any other TPA they're doing business with. So there's an ancillary benefit to these plan design concepts.
Yeah, because the broker, so you were talking about the broker's going to argue the fact that wouldn't utilization drive the cost up if I now only have a liability of $500 versus a $3,000 family? Why is it now driving utilization actually down due to human behavior?
Because you don't get to the top of the hill and have another as many as 11 months, if not 14 months, with a carryover provision to skid down that hill and spend the plan's money.
Meaning if I hit my deductible first month of the year, halfway through the year, I'm now running saying, let's get everything done now.
Remember the old carryover provision. If you had no bills in 2019 up until October, and in October through December you had bills, with a carryover provision, that deductible satisfaction carried over to 2020. So you could have as many as 14 months of sliding downhill, spending the plan's money. And by the way, the providers are willing to help you spend that money.
Sure. We'll help you meet that deductible.
That's right. Well, they'll help you meet it, and once you've met it, I've had employers...
Sounds like the physical therapist industry.
Right. Hey, listen, I had a doctor, I had a condition, and I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, why don't we run these tests over again? And I said, we just did them 3 months ago. He said, yeah, but they met your deductible, last time. And I said, well, I have a monthly deductible, and I've actually had doctors say, what kind of a crappy plan is that? You got a deductible every month? They didn't ask what the amount was. I didn't have a $5,000 deductible every month. I had a $500 deductible.
So we can take a plan for an employee from an employee's perspective and say, you're not going to go bankrupt because you got to write a check for $3,000 plus 50% co-insurance to $6,000. We're going to budget you monthly. So if you incur it for the first month, you're out of pocket, let's say in this example, $500, you're not bankrupt. So the employee loves it. The employer loves it because it's better benefit. So it's always like, what's the catch? So I had thought, well, the employer's going to take on a lot more risk, but what you're saying, the reason the utilization on this program is run better is because after I meet my monthly, even though it's better and lower, well, I have it next month, so I'm not going to go run for unnecessary care and allow a doctor to abuse the plan because I know I have, although it's not $3,000, I still have money to meet out of pocket.
That's right.
And
you're
overall,
still economically involved in the cost of your own care.
In over 30 years administering it, 20 years, 30, you've seen that we can price it actuarially the same, about 3x, and we're going to run about the same or even better.
Right.
Amazing. Talk to me about how it's a competitive advantage to brokers now. I mean, you know what? Let's cut that because you already did talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
By the way, don't cut now. Continue it on, because here's what I would like you to say. Or I would like to say. If you are going to be a good broker, to me, a good broker is, how would I want a broker to treat me if he was looking or she was looking out for my best interest? First of all, I want them to research the marketplace, continuously be a student of their profession, inform me whether I'm interested or not in what's new in the industry, because I would rather hear it from my broker that I trust than hear it from a competitor and say, why didn't my broker tell me that? Maybe he or she is not as sharp as they should be. That doesn't mean you're going to sell it every time. That's an indication to the prospect and the employer or your client. I'm in the game, and I'm in the game to help you, Mr. Employer, and your employees. That's what's key, and that's what sells. It's not rates that sell. And you know, if the spreadsheet worked so damn well, why are we even having this conversation? If the spreadsheet was the solution to the lowering the cost of healthcare, we wouldn't be sitting here. And frankly, I wouldn't have this ranch.
And I think, you know, when we put together the Chief Health Plan with you guys, I think it was, for me as a consultant, it was by far the most sexiest thing that I was excited about, because I knew I had something new to sell and a concept nobody had that gives me a competitive advantage, right? Because as a consultant and broker, you're competing against fully insured spreadsheets, and everybody has the same thing. So I always was a student of the game to find the next best solution to bring to clients and prospects, and this is what that solution gives me.
In fact, I just thought about something. Talking about human behavior, here we are talking about healthcare and wellness, and we are becoming an annuity for dermatologists with the sun.
There you go. Well, let's flip subjects right now. We talk about, people want to talk about the fix of healthcare, and we had conversations prior on human behavior, and we're in agreement on as to our thoughts on it. But go ahead, give me what your thoughts are on people trying to fix healthcare. And listen, it's admirable.
Definitely.
And we're all trying it. We want to continue to bring solutions. And over 30, 40 years, 50 years of doing this, what is your thought?
Well,
what is your fix?
Remember, when in this environment, when somebody wins, somebody else loses. And nobody wants to lose. Okay? If we go with the national Medicare for all, and they use Medicare reimbursements for that plan, it will devastate the provider community. Not as much as they'd like you to think, because on the average, Medicare reimburses a hospital about 92% of their reported expenses. It's not 50% or 20%, it's about 92%. So logic being that if half of the spend comes from government plans and half comes from the private sector, the facilities would break even if they charged 120, 125% of Medicare.
From the PPO.
From the provider.
Number.
Yeah, but see, what's interesting is PPO is not a plan. You just hit one of my hot buttons. A PPO is not a plan. We were in Washington, D.C. at Senator Johnson's office lobbying for price transparency. And his health specialist, I asked her a direct question in the meeting. I said, do you like PPOs? She didn't know what I was talking about other than, oh, I love PPOs. And I said, why do you love PPOs? Well, before we had a PPO, I had an HMO, and I couldn't choose my doctor. So she, first of all, thought that HMO and PPO was a health plan. Providers think PPOs are a health plan. They think PPOs are the payer. I would love to make the PPO the payer, so that when their contract called for me to pay their contracted rate for things that were medically unnecessary, I could say, wait a second, I'm not the payer, the PPO is. Get the money from them. They're not a payer. In fact, they're not a preferred provider organization. They are a provider protection organization. They protect themselves and the providers' revenue stream. So there's a misconception. You go into a hospital and they say, well, who's your plan? If you have First Health, they say, oh, it's not a First Health plan. First Health is the network. The plan is a self-funded employer plan, because that's who we used before we became part of the 90-degree benefits companies. There's misconceptions all over the place. Intentional. This is driving the marketplace for profit. And there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't go into business for myself to lose money. I did for a few years without knowing it, but I finally figured that out. The key here is, let's start at the base. The base is a patient and a doctor. I'll use Dr. Goldfinger, my first wife's OB-GYN, and I swear to God his name was Dr. Goldfinger, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Goldfinger, yeah. Anyway, all the women loved him because he looked sort of like Tony Curtis and all that. He had beautiful hair and he had suntan all the time from Milwaukee. Suntan is really odd. But he made a lot of money. And when we were pregnant with my first child, my daughter, I went to the doctor with my wife, and back then a rabbit died. That's how you determine whether you're pregnant. They injected into the rabbit from the wife's blood, and if the rabbit died, so a lot of rabbits died just to find out whether you had a baby or not. Very cruel. The rabbit died. So I go into the doctor's office, and the prenatal guy said, "How much do you charge for a normal delivery?" And why did I ask that? Nobody asks that today. Now they say, "Well, what's my copay?" or "What's my deductible?" But what do you charge? He said $300 for a normal delivery. It wasn't like a question from Mars. So I said, "Oh," and I pulled my booklet out, and we got a schedule, and it said normal delivery $250. So I said, "Dr. Goldfinger, my plan pays $250. He said, "I can work with that." Remember, it wasn't that long prior to that, in the Depression, when doctors would do services for chickens and for eggs. So most professional doctors are wonderful, wonderful people. They got into medicine not to buy airplanes. They ended up buying airplanes and boats, but they got into medicine to do things for people. I can't say the same for hospital facilities and for some other types of pharmaceutical companies. But anyway, the doctors are good people. So I asked the question, and guess what? We got the delivery for $250. Today, people don't ask questions because now you have a PPO, whatever that means. And that means that the doctor is guaranteed the PPO contracted price by the PPO. Patient has nothing to say about it. And if you're talking about companies like Cigna with their PPO network, you can't question a claim. You can't say they gave a box of tampons to a male patient and charged for it. You have to pay the PPO contracted rate. So when we talk about automation, that was designed to allow for automated claim processing, brainless claim processing. Send it through the system, it picks up the contracted rate and sends a check. Fortunately, most TPAs don't do that. There are a few that do. The larger ones do, especially the ones that are technology-based. They think technology is the answer.
Yeah, there's a lot, you see the market, you've been in the business a long time, you see this market, and everybody and their mother want to get in healthcare. It's a $4 trillion industry now. Silicon Valley, I mean, you got people pouring money. I see a TPA get $200 million in funding recently. It's like, I want to believe they're trying to fix healthcare.
Everybody wants a piece of the action.
But I think, hey, this is an industry that continues to go up and has margins like nobody's seen. What are your thoughts on these technology companies coming to an industry that you've been in 50 years, and what you've learned?
If you understand the premise of insurance, the insurance industry does not rate intentionally to make millions and trillions of dollars of underwriting profit. That's the risk side of the business. The actuaries are hoping that based on large numbers and trends, that if you charge this manual rate, you should be able to break even, maybe make 5 or 10% underwriting profit. Where is the profit? The profit is on the administration side and on the ancillary services. In fact, it's the same thing for many TPAs who are not transparent. I'll never forget my son when he joined me. We were going to quote the city of El Paso, the El Paso County, and the school districts in El Paso, which were in one interlocal agreement administered by a TPA in El Paso. And we got the data through another broker, not the incumbent. And my son walks into me and he said, "Dad, this is about he joined me in 1991, 92, maybe it's 1994. And he said, "Dad, they're administering claims for $5 an employee a month." And I said, "They can't." He said, "They are. Look, it's right in the administrative agreement." And I said, "David, I administered for $5 and lost money in 1975, 76. They can't do it." There's certain economies of scale for large numbers, 30,000 employees, but not that kind of, at some point in time, it's a curve that runs out and flattens out. So we didn't quote it. 3 years later, there was a federal investigation. That TPA went to jail. He tried to save his TPA from going away by selling it to his daughter. It didn't work. His family's no longer in the business, hadn't been for years. But what he was doing, he was administering for $5 an employee a month. But he had established a PPO network, and he was paying the dollars from the plan at billed charges and keeping the PPO discount. He was making a fortune on that account. I mean, I was envious. I didn't want to go to jail, but you can't, his fees probably worked out to $60, $70 and you didn't see it.
Never saw it.
So when you don't see it coming until you finally see it coming,
And
it's
that's what you see a lot in vendors and some of the, the reference-based pricing world and things like that. It's all hidden in the claims cost. And I ask you this question because we run into a lot with the chief health plan is obviously we have a high transparent fee and we don't hide from the fee.
correct.
And we tell them what we're doing for that fee. But I run into, the traditional broker mindset, which I had before was, well, Jesus Christ, we got 35 over here, you're 55. I can't do it. What does it cost to run a TPA from a profitability standpoint? And when you see an admin fee on a 100 life, a 500, 1,000 life group, where is typically the money hidden in other pockets that the employer doesn't know or see or the broker doesn't know or see?
Let's start from, if we can, let me go back to a basic. Compensation to a party in interest under ERISA is a prohibited transaction. A lot of brokers don't know that. Pay commission out of a ERISA self-funded plan is a prohibited transaction under the law. Now, does that mean you can't earn a commission?
Meaning through the
It's
stop
illegal.
loss or through which
Any
component?
compensation derived from a self-funded plan or a pension plan, remember ERISA was a pension law, is a prohibited transaction as written in the law. It's prohibited unless the plan administrator, and that's not the TPA. Under ERISA, the plan administrator is the named fiduciary of the plan. It could be the employer, it could be an attorney for there's a name in every plan document.
It's typically the employer.
Typically the employer. If the plan fiduciary signs off and approves compensation to a party in interest, it is an exemption from the prohibited transaction. But that doesn't exempt the PA, the plan administrator, or the named fiduciary, from legal liability. There have been many court cases with unions particularly, where a union board of trustees, in fact, in South Texas, we had a guy, there was a gentleman who was in a union plan in South Texas. He sat on the Taft-Hartley Benefit Plan Board Trust, for the trust. And he was given a pair of cowboy boots, maybe a value of $200, by a party in interest. He went to jail for 6 months for a lousy pair of boots, all right? But unions are far more suspect than, I mean, that's how the whole thing started, was the Teamsters Union in Chicago. That's how welfare plans got thrown into ERISA. It was just a pension law to begin with. So the question becomes, how do you get the prohibited transaction exemption? You disclose all party and interest compensation in advance of the sale on what's called a PT 8420, prohibited transaction 1984, 84-24. And it literally, in our administrative contract, I think it's Exhibit B and everything, it literally shows and should show every party in interest and what they're being paid for their services. And then it's signed off, when they sign the administrative agreement, it's signed off by the plan sponsor, the plan administrator. That makes it a legitimate transaction. However, if the plan administrator is not prudent in making sure that the compensation is realistic and not excessive, then that plan administrator could be liable and subject to both civil and criminal penalties. So let's start.
See most TPAs or obviously ASOs and stuff, are they disclosing it? Other TPAs, are they typically disclosing it? Or it's just like most healthcare industry, it's all hidden, smoking mirrors, and we get away with it?
I think the question is best answered by when is prior to the sale. In reality, if I've already sold an employer and he says, I'm ready to go, the paperwork is incidental.
Yeah.
So you present him, the Magna Carta, you present him sign off on your plan document, sign off on the administrative services agreement, sign off on the PT 8424, and they typically sign it without looking. The threat to that is all of that is exposed 19 and a half months later when the 5,500 is due on the plan, and all compensation of parties and interest have to be laid out. If you're going to ask me, do plan administrators read that? Probably 80% of them don't. It's just part of the paperwork, and everybody hates paperwork. So I can tell you what the law says. Now, if I were a plan administrator, which I was in my self-funded plan, I would ask the question, who's getting paid what here? And from what sources? You know, at one point in time, the reason that most plan administrators and most plans, the employer bought the stop loss. So who was the policyholder on the stop loss? If it's the employer, then you could argue, years ago, and the argument was made, that it's not coming from plan assets. So if the money for the stop loss is not coming from plan assets, then whatever, it's carrier money, they can pay whatever commission they want and it doesn't have to be disclosed. For many, many years, all right, all stop loss, whenever you looked at a plan, oh no, the employer owns the stop loss and the plan just pays the claim. Well then, many of us had an interesting thing occur called an economic downturn. We had one in Houston, a big one in 1984. And most of my plans, because the brokers wanted them that way, the employer stop loss was purchased and we built 15% commission into the stop loss. Thought nothing of it, that was the way business was done. Well, now what happens is you have a spec claim, a specific claim, and you get a reimbursement. If the policyholder is the employer, the check is made out to the employer. And I know you could never imagine this ever occurring. But when an employer's tight for money, and all of a sudden $75,000 comes in, and you've got to meet payroll or federal FICA expenses, somehow the claim didn't get paid, and the money was spent, and the employees were upset because they were still getting billed for a claim that should have been paid. And we said, wait a second, there's got to be a better way. Because the TPA was saying, well, you're a TPA, we went on your word that we were going to get paid this amount, and we didn't get paid, you're responsible. It created a nightmare.
Hence the rise of trust.
And so what we did is we said, we're going to have the plan or the trust, it could be a plan or trust, and or, be the policyholder, so that all the money funded by the employer and employee contributions go into the plan, and the plan writes the check for the stop loss. And now when the check comes in, it's from the XYZ to the exact XYZ employer benefit plan. And you put the money in the account, release the checks to the stop loss carrier, to the providers. So the entire industry learned from hard-fought lessons, because there were a lot of claims that went unpaid, especially if the employer went bankrupt. And by the way, the DOL really loved sending their people into your office for months on end when a large employer went bankrupt and claims were left unpaid. So the advantage, I guess, to being an experienced TPA is you try to protect yourself, your employers, the employees, the providers, and the brokers involved from being attacked.
Yeah, because I know from a brokerage consulting standpoint, I got enough things that keep me up at night.
You don't make enough money.
I don't need to lose sleep over things like this. I always talk about that, even when you look at reference-based pricing, things like that. I got enough problems in my life, let me tell you.
That's right.
Right? I don't need any more. It's tough enough in the business and sales and marketing and dealing with employers and employees. You think I need to worry about my partners not doing the right thing and having my back?
Quick anecdote here, anecdotal comment.
Is that Texas?
Yeah, no, well, I was getting a divorce and I wanted to buy a new car. And a very good friend of mine, we dated, we went on dates, a guy and his date, my date, and we'd go out together. We were very good friends. He was the president of a bank. So I called him up. His name was Dane, D-A-N-E, like Great Dane. He was a 6'7" guy, very imposing guy, good banker. And I called him and I said, Dane, I'm going through a divorce, but I need to have a car, and I need to borrow some money. He said, well, how much do you want to borrow? I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, let me explain it to you this way, Ed. You're a good friend. He said, if it's a signature-only loan, I trust you for $10,000. I probably trust you for 20. I may even trust you for 30, but I know I don't trust you for $1 million. So somewhere between 10 and $1 million is a gray area. I guess I would relate that to what I just said as follows. If you're a broker and you intend to rape and pillage and take a lot of money from one deal and skip to Mallorca or someplace. That's one philosophy. But on the standard deal, if you're a professional, you don't make enough money on any one deal to spend unnecessary dollars protecting yourself against your adverse acts. And I think your TPA, a good one, would counsel you that way and would help to protect you from those scenarios. We've tried to do that my entire career.